Good morning, everybody. I hope you can see normally my slideshow right now. If I don't see anything in the chat, that means you can. So I am Stan de Spiegelare. I'm a researcher at the European Trade Union Institute, and I've been doing research on European Works Councils now for about 5 years. And Cyprian has kindly asked me to talk with you about what is a European Works Council and what is it for. And I'm quite lucky that I'm the first speaker, so that means that I cannot repeat anything that has already been said. So let's start with two small stories. And for the first story, we go back to 2018. And if there are any French people in the room, they might remember that in 2018 there was a big strike wave against the plans of the government Macron to redo the labor law, etc. Now, this was a French thing, right? So you might ask, why am I talking about this in the context of a European Works Council? Well, there was one company, Eurostar, you know, the company that does the between the UK and France, that was quite affected by this. So this company, Eurostar, is of course a multinational company. It has staff from France and from the UK. And what happened is that this company started asking UK employees to take extra shifts. They said, well, okay, so maybe this weekend, can you do some extra shifts, etc. But what they were actually doing by asking extra shifts of their UK staff is breaking the strike of the French colleagues. Because if all UK employees start taking extra shifts, then the pressure that the French wanted to put on the company by doing a strike, then it disappears. And so what happened, the workers at Eurostar, they used the EWC to immediately discuss between them. And so the French said to the UK colleagues, like, look, this is happening. And they immediately took action and asked their UK colleagues not to take extra shifts. They didn't say that they couldn't go to work because it was obviously French strike, not a UK strike. So these English people were not involved, but they said, please just don't take an extra shift. You know, just please don't break the strike on the French side. And the people from the EWC, they went to the management and they discussed this with the management and said, look, you cannot do this kind of stuff. This is not okay that you break a strike by using your international staff and by bringing in UK staff to replace the workers. So this is the first story I want to say, and what I mean with it, I will say it in a bit. The second story I want to explain you a little bit is the story of General Motors, and I'm pretty sure that you know General Motors. So it's a huge international multinational company, car manufacturer, which has plants, you know, car making plants everywhere over Europe. And after a while, the workers at GM, they saw that the company is putting the competition between the different plants of the company. So what they were doing is when they had a new model to be made, they asked the Belgian plant and the Spanish plant and the German plant, they said, how cheap can you make this car? And the factory of the same company, so the plant of the same company that could make the car the cheapest, they won the contract and they got the production. So what they saw is, like in the first part of this image, is that all those plants individually were being put in competition. Now I hear myself twice, so maybe Cyprian, you can, yeah. So all those plants individually were being put into competition against each other. And they said, we have to stop this. And so they came together with the EWC, the people in the EWC, and said, let's not do individual negotiation anymore. If the company says, we want to produce a new car and we will select a plant, let's come together and negotiate this together. And this was called, you know, the Delta Group. Anyway, it didn't really work for a very long time, but for a bit of time, they managed to start to, you know, like go against the strategy of the company to put the plants into competition of each other. Now, what do I want to say with this story? If you will look at the legislation of EWCs, if you will look what is on paper about EWCs, you will not see this kind of examples. Because in EWC, if you look at the legislation, the rules, it's not very extensive. But what you do with an EWC, that's what you decide. And so I think if I want to say one thing with my presentation is that you make your own EWC and you use the legal basis, you use what the rules that are there, you use whatever is in the national legislation to think about what you want to do with the EWC and how you want to use it yourself. So that I think is my main argument. And now in the next couple of slides, I will discuss a little bit about the legislation, about these rules, but I want you to remember that they're only the first part, they're only the basis. And to be honest, they're not so strong. After 5 or 6 years of working with EWCs, I can tell you, if you only stick to what is legally given to you, you will not have a super duper EWC. You have to think about how you can use the rules to do something more. And that is, of course, up to you. So what is an EWC? I'm guessing that you know it's a meeting basically of employee and employer representatives. So they represent the employees and they discuss with management transnational issues. So now I'm going to go over some of the things that I said here. And the first thing, of course, is information and consultation. What do we mean with information and consultation? Information is the obligation of the management to provide the EWC in a timely fashion, complete and detailed information on transnational issues. I will discuss the transnational issues a little bit later. But what is important here, that is it is timely and that it's complete. And I quite often, when I talk to people of EWCs, I also ask them, like, is this information really new? And most of the representatives who I talk to, and there are also national level representatives, they're also in the Belgian Works Council, they're also in the Swedish Trade Union, they're also in the Spanish Trade Union. They say, yes, actually, a lot of this information that we get in the EWC is unique because it's the only time that we get real transnational information. On the national level, we only get national information. The second part is consultation. And consultation, I always explain it like it's the following process. The management will tell you that they want to do something. You have the opportunity to say whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, management will do it anyway. So there is a right to information and consultation, but there's no such thing as a veto right against the decision. There's no such thing as co-determination. There's no such thing as co-decision as you might have in some countries like Germany, Sweden, and to a lesser and some others. So it's information and consultation. You have the right to be informed about what's happening and to give your opinion. However, this all has to happen in a timely fashion, which means before the final decision has been taken, and that is quite important. Now, also keep in mind it's information and consultation, so you're being informed about complex issues such as transnational restructurings. You have the right to give your opinion, but of course this might require some time. So an EWC that has only one meeting a year, it's quite difficult to, at the same time, in one meeting, absorb the information and at the same time provide your opinion. So quite often, if it's about important decisions, transnational decisions, we advise to ask more meetings specifically on a restructuring, or more meetings in general over a year, because if you have one meeting a year, it's very difficult to provide your opinion, let alone to also get a response from the management on that opinion. So information and consultation, these are the official, let's say, the official competences of a European Works Council. But we've also asked in a recent survey that we did of people like you. So we've given surveys to 1,600 EWC representatives, and we asked them, what do you actually think the EWC is useful for? And as you can see on the slide, most of the people said, actually, we think that the EWC is more important for having contact with people of other countries, of aligning opinions, like trying to get to the same position between the French, the Germans, the Italians, and the Czech representatives. And then in the second place, to get information. In the third place, to have consultation to be consulted by the management. And roughly 22% said, well, actually, we can also influence the decisions. What I think I want to say again, and I said it in the beginning with this slide, is the contact between representatives, most of the people see this as the main added value of an EWC. So you also have to take this into account and use it in organizing EWCs. If you're gonna prepare a meeting, don't only focus on the agenda of the meeting, but also think about, okay, let's just exchange information here. What is happening in Poland? What is happening in Romania? What is happening in Italy? And let's just exchange information and see if there's something happening in the company that maybe the management is not telling us. And maybe we need to try to find a single opinion of what we think about. Now, I also wanted to explain you something about the issue of transnational. So what you're going to talk about is issues with transnational issues, right? So company decisions that have a transnational, that are transnational. So not necessarily only national, not only a decision that is affecting Belgium. Now, if I got it well, then Romek, my colleague, who we're doing this, doing a lot of the research together, he will explain a little bit more about the transnational issue. So I'm not going to talk about that a lot. I just wanted to give you I wanted to give you two examples, but I'm only going to give one about the effects, what it actually means to have transnational matters. Officially, we say restrained definition of transnational issues is whenever it affects more than one country. So whenever a decision affects two countries in Europe, you would have a transnational issue. But actually, we need to take a little bit of a broader definition. And I think the British Airways case is quite an interesting one in that regard. So what happened in British Airways, I think it's already more than 10 years ago, is that British Airways made a decision on the restructuring in Vienna, in Austria, but they made that decision in the UK. And the EWC said, we need to be informed and consulted because this is a transnational issue. It's quite important. We want to say something about it. However, British Airways said, no. It's only an Austrian issue. We are only doing a restructuring in Vienna. We don't need to discuss this with the EWC. So the EWC went to court, and the courts, well, actually the arbitration committee, they said, because the decision has been taken in another country, so the decision about Vienna, about Austria, has been taken in the UK, we presume that this is a transnational issue, so the EWC has to be affected, has to be informed and consulted. And this is quite strong. This means that any decision that affects your country, but has been taken in a different country, should be an issue that is for information and consultation in the European Works Council. If you're a Belgian and you're in a German company, and in Germany they make a decision about what's happening in the Belgian plant, you have a right to information and consultation. The same for the Italian, the Spanish, and the Portuguese colleagues. So an EWC is a meeting of representatives, which means that you guys, you're employee representatives. That means, of course, that you need to represent the employees in your company and in your country. And for this, I want to say two things. In the EWC, in the legislation on EWC, there is a very clear right for you guys to be in connection with the national level. There's not even a right, there is a duty for you guys. If something is discussed in the EWC, that you go back to your rank and file, to your colleagues on the national level, to discuss this with them, to tell them, look, we've discussed X, Y, and Z in the EWC. What do you think about it? Because you are a representative. So you need to know what they think about issues, and they need to know what you're doing on the European level. So reporting back, being in connection with the national level is, if you ask me, an essential thing of what an EWC is all about. And it's not only a right, as I said, it's a duty. And so I invite you to think about, if you have your EWC, how are we doing this? Are we doing newsletters? Are we trying to speak about these issues in the national works councils with the national trade unions? Are we doing some surveys of employees? Are we going from time to time to visit the company to discuss issues with them? All of them are possible. Another issue that I wanted to discuss with you is the right to training. And of course, you all know that you have a right to training because you're here in this webinar, which is just absolutely great. I just want to remind you that from the legislation, from all legislations on EWC, there is a clear right for EWC members to be trained, and the cost has to be paid by the employer. And we're talking here not only about the cost of the training, but also about the working time. So the time that you spend in a training should be normal working time. And I'm pretty sure that in the coming speakers will discuss more about training, and I'm pretty sure that Cyprian and Frederick will do some advertisement about the ETUI training. But I just want to stress two things. There are two, let's say, different kind of trainings. And I think both of them are important for different reasons. So I invite you to do them both. One of the trainings is training like this with EWC members of very, very different EWCs. And that is very useful because in this kind of trainings, you can learn about how other EWCs are doing something. You can learn from others. You can say like, okay, so we had this problem. We didn't know how to do it. How did you do that? You learn best practices. Very important for EWC. The other type of trainings are the EWC only trainings. Is that ETUI or another training provider invites the whole EWC for 1 or 2 days, and you discuss with your colleagues of your company about how you're going to organize the EWC. So you don't learn from others, you only learn from the trainer, which in some case, in Cyprian's and Frederick's trainer, that's excellent quality. But what is mostly important is you form a team. You get to know each other much more. You are 2 days together with each other, you form a team, and you think about strategically, what are we going to do with this EWC? And shall we only follow the agenda of the management, or shall we try to make something more from the EWC what we think is important? So I've already discussed a little bit about the importance of timing. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I see that also my time is almost finished already, is that, and I see Cyprian nodding, what is essentially important is that you have to be informed and consulted before any major decision is taken in a company on the transnational issue. So please do remember that. And always when they say, no, the decision has been taken, you don't have any influence on the decision, you can say, no, according to the legislation, you cannot have made the decision yet, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. Why should you give your opinion on something that is already decided 100%? So I'm going to move forward a little bit. I know that my colleagues will do an excellent job in explaining all these other things. So what I think is, what I want to still stress as a last topic is restructuring. As I said, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, approximately, we've done a survey of EWC representatives. And one of the things that we were quite surprised about is that 90%, more than 90% of the EWC members said that in the last 3 years, their company has been through a massive restructuring. Before we said in EWC, you have your yearly meeting, maybe 2 meetings a year. And when there is a big restructuring, then you have a right to an exceptional meeting, or let's say an additional meeting. But if we know that 90% of the EWC members have been, their company has gone through a serious restructuring, we cannot call these meetings exceptional anymore. And you have to take into account that restructuring will happen. It will happen in your company quite soon. And in this case, again, information and consultation is necessary before the final decision has been taken. And bear in mind that this information and consultation shouldn't only be about the restructuring. For example, they say we're gonna close a plant, or we're planning to lay off 300 employees in Europe. The information and the consultation should not only be about how you're going to close a plant. Should it be 300 or 250? You can also provide your opinion about alternatives. You can also provide your opinion and say, you guys plan to do this restructuring because there is a loss in demand, or because the production is too expensive. We have an alternative. We are the experts. We are working on the field. We are working in those factories. We're also thinking about what the company could and could not do. And maybe these 3 ideas could help the company, and then you don't have to have a restructuring. And this is obviously extremely complicated. It's a very hard task, but know that you can ask, 1, additional meetings to get the necessary information on the restructuring to really comprehend what is going on. And second, and this is most important, expert advice. It's not in all national legislations, I have to admit, and definitely not in all EWC agreements, but in most of the EWC agreements that I read, there is a clause that you can get an expert in this kind of situations, and you can hire a financial expert, somebody who is an expert in restructuring and who can think about, economically about an alternative to the proposal that the management is doing. So try to rise above yourself, let's say, and not only react, but try to proactively think about what the EWC could be. So again, in the same vein of trying to take hold of your own EWC, in my experience, preparatory meetings, debriefing meetings with the employees alone are essential, are absolutely crucial. You cannot have an EWC meeting that before that EWC meeting, you haven't sat together with the EWC members to think about, okay, what are we going to do? And not only go over the agenda that the management sent you, but try to also think about what do we want to do with that meeting? Not only how do we want to react, but what do we want to discuss? What do we want to put on the agenda or discuss in the different topics? And I think these are essentially important. So I think the main message of my presentation here, my introduction, is the one that I gave in the beginning. The EWC legislation gives you a specific number of tools, gives you a specific number of rights, but they are not super extensive. And if you will only use those, you will get information. You can say what you think about something that is happening on the company, but you're not gonna have a really, really influential EWC, and you're not gonna be able to say, let's say, counter the power of the management in your company. In order to do that, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to think strategically, what do we want to get from this EWC, and focus on that, and not let yourself be guided only or limited only about what the management is giving you in the meetings. So that was it for me. I think 10:35. I kept relatively well to the timing. So I'm going to give back the words to Cyprian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stan, for the excellent opening speech. And I think what I picked from this, and I hope that the most of the audience too, was a call to be proactive, to aim higher than we used to develop our EWCs, and this is an excellent added value. Just to the EWC theory or legislation. This is a layer of the attitude that we should and we can do more than we did before, especially in those times when restructuring is coming, when COVID changes our world and our economies and our EWCs as well. I think it's extremely important to remember that EWC is a tool in our hands which can change the companies and the economies and the lives of the workers and ours. So thank you, Stan. Thank you again. There is one or two questions, but I think we can move them to the session on at the end of the hour, and move straight forward to the theme of communication and networking. So I call Vidya to the floor.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cyprian, and thank you, Stan. I will be following on from what Stan has presented and show you how we can do it. As Stan said, it's how you do it. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. Right. Okay. Quick introduction. I am a trainer. I work with the EWC network. I have been for a number of years. I have been part of this network, and I have trained over the years quite a number of EWCs. So I will follow up from what Stan has presented and go into the more nitty-gritty of what it means to communicate and network within the EWC, knowing that this is going to be a key job for members of the EWC. It's vital, and it's a very demanding part of the responsibility of the members. What do we mean by communication? Now we're talking about information. We're going to be talking about how information flows, not just written information, but also the spoken information, and not to forget that we also communicate a lot through our gestures and facial expressions and our hands. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're not expressing much through facial expressions because we have the mask, but we're lucky now we are doing this virtually and we have removed our mask, but we can still express a lot through the eyes and through the body language. So when we talk about information and how it flows, it doesn't just go up and down, it also goes round and it goes across. And we need vectors, channels to use and tools to communicate with. So we will be looking at what are these tools and what are these vectors that we can use. Networking is also a vital part of the task, and it's about contacts you have, contacts you make. Networking is about how you influence, how you lobby, and how you get insider information. So I will be making a very quick overview of what we mean by communicating and what we mean by networking in the EWC. The European Trade Union Institute trains roughly 50 EWCs a year, and we have come across over the years all of these different stages of development of an EWC. Here we have observed 4 situations that an EWC can find themselves in. So if we take, for example, the first situation, which we call the symbolic EWC or the empty box, here we see that there is no exchange of information and there is no working together. Members come together, and then after the meetings, after the plenary meetings, they go their separate ways and don't talk to each other again until the following year. We sometimes call this kind of meeting a tea drinking club. Management, on the other hand, consider these EWC meetings as a little bit of a waste of time. They consider it as more of a cost than a benefit, or just a legal obligation that they have to fulfill. However, there are statistics that the E2I have in fact produced that show that where there are active functioning EWCs, companies tend to fare far better and often overcome social and economic difficulties more successfully. In the second situation, what we call the passive EWC, better. Members get information. There is some contact between the members. There's some contact with trade unions, a bit of cooperation. But the problem here is that there is little interaction with management and little and not much within the EWC. If we move on to the third situation, what we call project-based EWC, there's a lot more interaction, there's continuous exchange, there's a certain consistency internally, probably functioning working groups with set goals. But here you can see that the communication, well, we wouldn't call it communication, it's just information download, is with management is still top down. The fourth case, the fourth situation, the participating EWC is of course the most effective EWC. Interaction with management and workers is constant. Arguments are put on both sides of the table, and it's not just a simple yes, no answer, we don't like it, we like it. Members make it a point to have their opinions heard, taken into account, and members also request feedback. The EWC is organized, the EWC have all the means to function properly. So this is a question that you can ask yourself. Your EWC, where would you place your EWC? Or for example, where would you like your EWC to be in a year's time after this training session? So how does it work? Stan stressed the importance of keeping the contact. Well, in an effective and well-organized EWC, we will see that all the communication lines are connected. So at the heart of the network, we see the EWC, or the Work Council of a European company, and at the heart is the Select Committee, which is part of the EWC. On the left-hand side, the red lines refer to the communication that takes place at a local level. So at a local level, we're dealing with the EWC, between the EWC, their members, how they interact with each other. It's communication with the deputy members and communication with the Select Committee. But it's also how you communicate with local management, staff, the worker representatives, knowing that the EWC has an obligation to inform about the content and the outcome of the EWC meetings. There's also contact with the local national trade unions. On the right-hand side, the blue lines all connect and refer to communication at a European level. So there we are communicating with central management, with the European trade union federations, and where they exist, with board level employee representatives who sit on supervisory boards. Even if these representatives are only present in part of the company, they should still receive information that may be relevant for the entire group. And therefore, they have an early warning duty to tell both management and stakeholders that the information and consultation procedures need to be respected. They also have a responsibility towards the EWC members and the worker reps at the local level. Their job is to inform about possible future developments in the company, of course, without revealing any confidential information. So we can see that communication should always go in two directions, hence the arrows pointing in both. So as an EWC member, the first goal would be to make this network work, to get organized as a team, to work as a team, to realize that you are not an island and you're not on an island. There are a host of institutions and representative bodies that gravitate around EWCs who are dedicated to your duties, who are dedicated to your mandate, and who are dedicated to your needs. So the EWC is in fact at the center of a network. And we can break down this network into three circles. So here's the first circle. So the first circle is made up of the official members. So the official members are the members of the EWCs coming from different countries. They can help each other. Each individual member is the first one responsible for making it work. You go to a meeting and you will say, I'm going to this meeting, a plenary meeting. What am I going to bring to this meeting? Okay, the first one responsible is the member, it's himself. And then you have the deputy members. Some deputy members attend EWC meetings. I'm talking about the plenary meetings, not all. And sometimes these deputy members are often forgotten. They should be kept up to date constantly because they too have interesting information to convey. In your inner circle, you will have the chairperson and a secretary. They have a central role in organizing and of keeping the EWC functioning properly. It is best if at least one or both of these members are worker representatives at a local level as well. And of course, the select committee is responsible for all the information flow. And it should always be possible that the select committee have the opportunity to meet without the presence of management. But they should also act as a permanent link between management and the other EWC members. And you will hear much more about the role of an EWC later on in the program. As I talked about earlier, board level representatives are also sometimes EWC members, and they usually participate in meetings. The central management and other management representatives are also part of this circle. So what happens between the meetings? So if you've got a plenary meetings, preparatory meetings, meetings with the select committee, there should be information sharing between these meetings. Board members can help as they are in the front line, and they can spot early warning signals that tell you something's in the pipeline, that there's a new reform or new project. And this information can be, of course, very useful to the other colleagues in the other countries. The contact circle, here is where the groundwork is done. EWC members have contact with local worker representatives who supply first-hand information about the company, about business at the grassroots level. They have contact with local staff, and they have this obligation to inform them about the nature and the outcome of the results of the discussions that take place in the plenary sessions. But remember that the staff, local staff, are a source of information for identifying transnational topics. It's also important to keep that contact with the local staff members, the local staff, your colleagues. Show them that you're doing useful work, give them feedback. If not, you will lose their support when you need their support. If not, you'll be considered as tourists, VIP employees, privileged employees going around the world. So don't forget that they need feedback too. And don't forget they are a vital resource for you, for EWC members, to know what is happening in the various countries, in the companies, in the various countries. Also in your contact circle, local trade unions, here you have an example of 3 German confederations. You have local management. Often local management are kept in the dark themselves by their own hierarchy about what is happening in EWC. You are a valuable source of information for local management. But remember that they're also partners for discussing about the consequences of decisions that are taken at the European level. And sometimes these decisions are not implemented. And so they are your partners in negotiating that these decisions are also implemented at a local level. Also in the contact circle are the European trade union federations. Here you have an example of Industrial, which is a consolidation of the metal, chemical, energy, and textile workers of Europe. You will learn more about the European federations later in the program. They provide information about the sector, so they have an overview of what is happening in that particular sector, so you can get a broader vision of how that sector is evolving in terms of employment or innovation or research and development, etc. And also remember that the European Trade Union Federations are also partners in the negotiation process of EWC agreements. And of course, they assist EWCs in cases of dispute or litigations. The support circle. The support circle provides the resources, the documentation, the counseling, the training, audits that are at the disposal of EWC members. Like today, we are in a training session that was organized by E2I Education. The ETUC, the E2I provides the link to the political level. They coordinate between European trade union federations. They carry out research. We have examples of that, and we will have examples of that in our program today. They have health and safety specialists who are at your disposal. They provide training. Stan stressed that the importance of training as well. Project development. Expert agencies and training providers that are what we call trade union friendly work hand in hand with the E2I and the ETUC. Here we've got an example of the Dutch training provider, Format, and I think there's somebody in Format later on, and also the German training and consultancy agency, TCI. So do check your agreement. As it was said, it is working time training is a right, is something that is in all the agreements that has been provided for. And be very careful how you choose your trainer provider. Also important, the E2I organizes conferences. There are sessions like these ones, but this time it's virtual. But we organize the open sessions where you are in contact with other members, EWC members from other multinational companies, and it's a useful benchmarker and a comparative sort of instrument that is available to you, finding out what's happening in other companies in the same sector, for example. Having said all of this, how is it all set to music? How to become a proactive EWC? Later in the program, Frédéric Turlan is going to present some success stories, and I hope that will enlighten you on how it happens, because it can happen. It's not an easy task, but we can manage to get all of this operating smoothly. The duties of an EWC are very, very challenging. And here are some of the challenges that we are faced with. Members have to have a European outlook on policy, on business, in spite of the fact that members are firstly national and they come from different cultures. So again, it's striving to be united in this diversity, which is not necessarily easy. The number of challenges they are faced with come from the different working representation systems in Europe. Means to say that at a local level, information and consultation procedure are not the same, and we don't have the representative bodies, the same representative bodies in every country. So we are faced with that difference, which will be discussed later on as well. So there are differences between the Western European countries and Eastern and Central European countries, which have a less developed system. Sometimes information consultation bodies are just non-existent. There's also trade union presences in the EWC. Some members are unionized, but some are not. We also get the situation where there are more than one trade union present in the same company. And these trade unions are also, may also be competing with each other. Discussions can be quite heated because getting everybody to agree on a common action, getting all the members to agree on some form of solidarity may not have been easy tasks because there could be conflict of interest. Restructuring could mean losses, job losses in some countries, job gains in others. And the news is not always good. So it's a very hard task to come to a conclusion or to come to some kind of consensus. Another obstacle or another challenge is that EWC members are usually very, very busy people. They wear different hats, they have their own jobs, they have local responsibilities. They could be a shop steward, they could be in health and safety committees. And if an EWC meeting is just once a year, they still need to find time for this. But again, I will reiterate the message as Stan says. Besides these barriers, and I can go on and say, okay, of course, there's a language barrier, and sometimes we don't get an answer to our questions. We pose a question to management, and the management says they'll give us an answer. We don't get enough feedback. But there's still a lot of potentials, a lot we can do. And we must use the power that we have and a power to overcome these obstacles. And to overcome this obstacle, we need the help and the resources that are available that I presented just now in the contact circle, in the support circle. So remember, you are not alone. You have the resources. It is important to stay motivated and also to say, okay, it's just one meeting a year, but still, it's still that. It's the only moment maybe that you can join together with your colleagues from other countries to exchange, to talk to your colleagues about the state of affairs in the company, even if it's just once a year. So the message here, my message to you, is to stay alive between the meetings, because this can actually work, as you will see later on, presentations of EWCs that function very effectively. How is this done? Well, there's firstly some kind of timeline that is important to lay down when you have meetings with management, select committee meetings, preparatory meetings. It's nice to have a good timeline well ahead of time, where you can see where the select committee meets, with management, and what happens between the plenary meetings. This is all mapped out before information is collected, information is shared, questions are raised with the select committee and put forward to central management. It's put on the agenda. So what you want to see is your question up there. Then the information is then disseminated, it trickles down, it goes in both directions, to a local level and to a European level. Minutes of the meetings are disseminated as well, usually in a written form, but there are other ways and means of disseminating information. We have a lot of very sophisticated tools these days. Conference calls is on that, but we have what we're using right now is a very quite convivial tool to use to share information. Even if it's just sending a Happy New Year greeting at the end of the year, keep the contact. And I will end very shortly because I'm a little bit behind time. Here are some of the tools that we have available to do this, and more EWCs are using all these social media tools. Most are free, and of course, especially with the sanitary crisis of today, we find ourselves faced, sort of don't have much of a choice but to use these tools: smartphone, computers, Wi-Fi, email, webcams, of course, printers, social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, Twitter, Instagram, Skype, preferably a closed system, of course, and so on. And other tool applications for sending heavy documents, large folders on WeTransfer, OneDrive, SharePoint. And we do have available translation tools. If you do not have access to interpreters and translators, Google Translate is the Bing translator, which is Microsoft, and DeepL. But we are very lucky today to have our interpreters and translators in flesh and blood, but even if it's virtual. And so we are thankful for their assistance, for assisting us today.
Gerhard, gehst du?
On the EWI website, the link is below. You will find this little guidebook, How to Organize Your Communications Network. It's available in 9 languages and it can be downloadable. So please go ahead and download it. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vidya, for covering the essentials of the communication. Maybe you can break down the format of constant speaking and open for session for the questions, and maybe both Vidya, you and Stan, you can take 1 or 2 questions from the audience for the moment. Just what I picked before, there were 3 questions in the chat zone. A question from Adrian on transnationality, and what will happen if the American company takes the decision affecting one European country only. So this was the first question. The question from Romano about the Brexit issues. So it's more for the other participants, or for the sharing current knowledge, what exactly is happening with those EWCs affected by the Brexit. Are the colleagues staying? Is the reference law changing? And so on. So this was the second question. And the third question from Patricia. It was about a cooperation between national unions and EWC members, and how to develop it, and what shall we do if it's rather a rivalry than a cooperation between, you know, the local level and EWC. So these are 3 questions I've picked up. Maybe you'd like to have a short answer on them. And at the same time, for the audience, if you want to have more questions, just ask them through the chat or take the floor. So Vidya or Stan, can you pick one of those?
Yeah, sure. I can maybe comment on the first 2 questions shortly. But already stating that, so my colleague Romek, Romuald Jagodzinski, who's gonna present normally in the afternoon, he's more of a legal expert than I am. So maybe you can also, you know, ask also his opinion. So about the first question on the US decisions affecting EU company, well, I think first of all, it's always important to think whether you guys want to have it discussed in the EWC, yes or not. So if it's a purely local issue, it might be make more sense to discuss it purely locally, even if the decision has been taken elsewhere. But if you think that it's important and it has a transnational scope because of the size of the decision, for example, it's a closure of a plant, it's such a big decision that it has, even though it's only in one country, it's so important you want to discuss it. Indeed, the moment that it's taken in another country, there's a presumption that it's a transnational issue. However, it's not because it's a US company that the decisions are always taken in the US. A US company with a subsidiary in France can perfectly, the subsidiary in France can perfectly make a decision only about France, so it's a local issue. But if the decision about France is taken in the US, in the UK, or in Germany, then you can argue that it has to be discussed in the EWC. And then regarding Brexit, we always get that question. It's of course also very difficult for us because we don't know which kind of Brexit there will be. Will there be an agreement or not? Hard Brexit, soft Brexit? I don't know which kind of Brexit they have invented. But what the advice is from the European Trade Union Federations, and Anika and Miriam, they have co-written the advice, so they might correct me if I'm wrong, is that now you negotiate, you discuss with management. If you have a EWC under UK law, you discuss and you try to agree on, you know, the moment that there's a hard Brexit or whatever, we're going to transfer to another legal framework, one. And two, you negotiate, you agree with management that as far as possible, the UK representatives can stay in the EWC as full members, independent of which kind of Brexit that is happening. So that was from my side.
Yes, on the question of the relationships between cooperation between national trade unions and the EWC, yes, it's a very complicated question because, as I said, the national systems are very different. I think the question to ask firstly is the members of the EWC. I don't know, am I being seen? Yeah, am I on? Okay, the members of the EWC is to ask the question how they get onto the EWC. Now, you have all different types of cases where you have the members they could be elected members, so elected by their local works council. They could be elected by the trade unions, or they could be not elected at all and maybe appointed. So you have to already see what is the backing, what is backing them? Are they being supported by their trade unions or not? In the case of several trade unions, it's not easy to maybe sometimes work alongside with all the other trade unions. But I really can't really give a straight answer to that question because I don't know what the worker representation system is that we're comparing. But for sure, local trade unions also provide training, assistance, counseling, audits, experts to work councils that I know, for having worked with French trade unions and French European companies. I hope I answered partly the question.
Okay, thank you. Stan, maybe you can take this one quickly too. A question from Kevin. It's about the management using an agent in Ireland pre-Brexit. I'm guessing this is a question about using it before Brexit already, but I'm not really sure on that.
So yeah, I can try. To be honest, I'm not very. Okay, I'm not very confident in answering the question because it's something that we've seen before Brexit, as you say, that a lot of the companies choose Irish legislation for their EWCs, and we also see it now with Brexit that a lot of the UK companies are going to Irish legislation. They mostly give a reason that, well, it's easy because it's English, but it probably is more than that. And at least for the trade union legislation in Ireland, we know that it's relatively weaker than in other countries. And so, but in general, the national legal framework that you choose, it matters. It definitely matters. Don't get me wrong, but it's not a make or break. So it's not because you're under Irish legislation that you will have a significantly worse EWC. There are definitely parts that it's worse. But also for that one, I hope that that Romek, who's much more a legal expert than I am, might provide you with some better insights.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I guess we will find more answers later on with the next presenters. Romek mentioned, you've mentioned Romek, and speaking on confidentiality and transnationality might be able to answer Maria's question as well. And Jan will be speaking about different representation systems in Europe, might be able to have some more questions. And I will try to respond to the chat zone so everybody feel responded somehow. So thank you, Vidya. Thank you, Stan. You can stay with us if you have time, if you wish. Interacting with the audience on through the chat. And now I would like to hand over to Jan, but before that, Jan probably will be using French in his presentation. It's up to Jan, but if he will, everyone should turn the interpretation on English channel to understand, to hear the English version. But handing out now to Jan, decide what main language you will use.
What's the easiest way to you? English or French?
I mean, if you feel more confident in French, we can try in French. But
Okay.
if it won't work for any reason, then we will skip to English.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Do you have the presentation?
Yep.
No, we're still seeing the build slides, Jan.
Oh.
It's the next button to the right.
Uh,
Down the bottom, the little one with the projector. To the left of the 100, that's the one.
Yes. Once again.
Yeah, perfect.
so,
You have to click it once again, Jan.
oh. Okay.
No, not seeing anything.
Sure.
Okay, maybe you try to stop sharing and turn the PowerPoint on again. Okay, just step by step, turn the PowerPoint again, your presentation. Perfect. Now use the small, yes, this one once. Click it. Perfect. And use the space button or the arrow down to move to the next slide.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. So my name is Jan Voets. I had first contact with European Work Councils in the 90s on the level of the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, where we tried to set up some voluntary agreements and some voluntary European Work Councils in the big construction companies in Europe. Later on, I've been coordinator of several European Work Councils like Bouygues, Lyonnaise des Eaux du Metz, Compagnie Générale des Eaux, most of the time French European Work Council, and also giving training on European level. And now I'm a member of the A3 channels network, and time to time I'm giving training to European Work Council, or members of European Work Councils in all the sectors. So I was asked to give a short presentation about the different systems of worker representation and also the different system of trade unions. And that presentation has not the objective to go in details, but just to give the major differences between these systems and between how workers are organized in the different countries. My experiences from more than 20 years with European Work Councils shows that to create effective cohesion between the members from the different countries, they must know about the working methods, objectives, and expectations of the representatives coming from those countries. And certainly when, like Stan already mentioned, you want to make your European Work Council active by stimulating like internal networking, then you have to know more from each other. You have to know how in each country trade union representatives can act which possibilities they have, which limits that they have to continue the work on European level. So effectively, I think it's very important to create an active, permanent network between the representatives and the substitutes, but also to use every moment, training, preparatory meeting, debriefing, to have more contact with each other and to speak over those things that you find that is important. Because we see that in some European Work Councils, it's a central management who is dictating the items of the agenda. And that means that people have not the time to speak about the real problems. It's naturally, it's very important to be informed about economic and financial results of the company. But I think as a representatives of workers, it's even more important to know more about the social side of the company. So information and consultation bodies already exist. I think most of them are created after Second World War, but it is with the directive of 2002-14 that now in each European country they have to set up by transposition of the directive some committee of information and consultation. So when we look to that directive, and I will do it very fast, so it means that in every, that's the directive, every country in the companies with more than 50 workers, or if the company is present with different unities, even from 20 people, they have to set up a system of informing and a consultation. So that transposition is done in each country and can be different also from country to country. But it's important to know that normally in each European country, and so that means that every representative of the European Work Council has also to be informed and to be consulted on local level. So definitions of information and consultation, I will not repeat it because Stan, I think, already was speaking about information and consultation, but it's the same nearly what you have in the Directive of European Work Councils. So the competences, so on local level is recent and probable development of activities and economic situation, substantial changes in work organization or contractual relations, situation, structure, probable development of employment, always with the possibility that management is asking for confidentiality, and also that concept confidentiality is different from countries to country. For example, in Belgium, it's very limited that they can ask for confidentiality. In other countries, it can go very wide. So the practical arrangements, protection, juridical procedures, sanctions, work councils, how members are nominated or elected is regulated by the national transposition and can be different also from country to country. So what's the union involvement in those work councils? So you can have different possibilities. First of all, in some countries, it's only directly trade union members who are the worker representatives. So it's an unique system where the representatives are all directly nominated or elected between the trade union members. In other countries, you have a dual system where on one side you have people who are nominated or elected in the trade union, and on the other side you have a work council where people are elected or nominated also by the workers of the company. So if we are looking in Europe, the differences who exist, you have the countries colored red, in those countries, the work representatives are directly nominated or elected between the trade union members. But there is a certain difference even in those red companies. When I'm taking the Scandinavian countries, there you are sure that the trade union members are directly linked to a national trade union organization, while in, for example, Romania and Bulgaria, you can have trade unions set up on local level, and that trade union will nominate or delegate the trade union representative in the work council. And we know that in some countries and some companies, it's management himself who is organizing setting up of a trade union. So automatically, the work representatives, even being a member of a trade union, are not real trade unionists. Then you have the blue colored countries. This one is a dual system, where on one side you have work councils, but composed work representatives, but you have also trade union representatives directly. Then you have the green countries, the green colored countries. That's also work council with big influence of trade union, but in some cases it can be that the influence of the trade union is very weak. I know, for example, in France, some work councils have only non-organized members because in the first election, the level of elected people is not high enough, and then you can have a second round where non-organized people can also be elected. And then you have the yellow colored countries, and the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and where there is a distinction between the work council and the trade unions. In theory, normally they have no direct influence on the work council. It depends of if most of the people are organized or not, but so it's an autonomous organ who is functioning in those countries. Those countries are also the countries where the Mitbestimming or cogestion, I don't know the real word in English, is much higher than in all the other European countries. Other difference is the possibility to create, if the company is present with different companies in a country, then they can create a group work council on national level. So there also you have different possibilities. In some countries, and I take the red colored countries, it's automatically they have to install a group work council. In the yellow countries, it's possible to set up a group work council, but then people have to take the initiative and ask to set it up. And then you have the blue colored countries. There is no possibility to set up a group work council. Now, looking to the European Work Council, when I take, for example, Belgium, most of the time Belgium have only one mandate in or two mandates in European Work Council. So if a company is present with several different companies in Belgium, the best is to create something on national level. So the Belgian representative can also inform and consult all the colleagues from the different companies who are present in Belgium. The same in other countries. When I take Poland, it could be that there is only one mandate for the Polish colleagues, but if the company is present with several companies, sometimes even in different sectors, then I think it's very important to create also on national level something where worker representatives coming from the different units can inform each other and can consult each other and can prepare the meetings of the European Work Council on national level and can also have a debriefing of the meetings from the European Work Council on national level. Then other difference is who is the chair of the Work Council, or of in which way the Work Council is composed. So there you have two different systems. In the first system, the chair is someone from management. In the other system, the chair is also a worker representative. And when I take Europe, you can see those with the elm are countries where the Work Council is chaired by a worker representative. It's only in France, in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Denmark that the Work Council is chaired by a representative of management, from management. Belgium is different from those other three countries because in Belgium, the Work Council is composed on a common representative. So that means for each worker representative, there is also a representative of management. And in some European Work Councils, based on the Belgium transposition, you will see that for each country, there will be also a mandate for a management representative. And when I'm thinking, for example, on the European Work Council from Holcim, so the French representatives from the workers were always accompanied by a representative from the French Holcim management. And the German representatives from the workers from Holcim were always accompanied by a management representative from German. And that it's very, very difficult then to have in the formal meeting of the European Work Council to have an open discussion because the worker representatives from France are afraid to say some things about the French system or the French working conditions because their human resource manager is next to them. So it's very frustrating, such a kind of European Work Councils. And for those who have the intention to negotiate on the Belgian transposition, try to limit those things and do not accept that there is for each country also representatives from management, because it's really framing the working of the Work Council. So then another difference is the presence of the worker on the level of the board level or other. So there also you have different possibilities. This type of representation, so in board level or the supervisory council, depends on the national legislation. In some countries, it's organized by law. In other countries, it's not really organized or even not possible. But I think, if I remember on this moment, there is a new directive, but it's not already transposed in the different countries, who will open the possibility to have worker representatives in the board level or the supervisory council. I know, for example, the transposition is already done in France. And in France, in all the companies with more than 2,000 workers, I think, they have the possibility to nominate 2 representatives on board level. But also with very frustrating remarks. For example, in the French company Eiffage, they have the possibility to nominate 2 people, but already now management was telling, so first of all the people who are nominated, they have to go out of all their trade union mandates. So they have to go out of the work council, they have to go out the European Works Council, and already now management is putting pressure, saying that they can participate to the meetings, but it's very confidentiality, and they have to limit the contact with the worker representatives in the local work councils or in the European Works Councils. So it's a very frustrating thing. So in which countries it's possible? So in the countries colored red, it is organized by law. So automatically people have the possibility to be present in the on board level. It's different from country to country. I think in Sweden, even in companies with 25 workers, they have the right to nominate or to elect someone in the on board level. In other countries, like I told already, in France it's 2,000. In Germany, it's on 2 different levels. 1 people, I think, in all the companies with 500 workers, and if it is a certain level, they have the 50% of the mandates in the supervisory council, with that difference that the president of the supervisory council is always someone from management, and his vote is it's double vote. So that means if there is 50-50, it's always the management side who will take the majority. Then you have the yellow colored countries. It's possible in certain conditions, most of the time in companies with who are from public input. And then in the blue colored countries, it's not possible to nominate or to elect someone in the on board level or in the supervisory council. So that for the different systems of worker representatives, in reality, the difference are even from country to country can be very different. I know in Germany, people have the possibility to set up a work council in companies with 5 workers. In Belgium, they have to organize social elections in companies with 100 workers to set up a work council, to elect a work council. In the companies with from 50, it will be the Committee for Health and Safety who will also have the possibility to be informed and to be consulted. So it's very different from country to country. And the best is when you are creating a European Works Council that you use the necessary time to explain each other in which way information and consultation is organized in the different countries present in the European Works Council, and eventually also explain if there are other representation bodies like committees health and safety, job stewards. So really explain how in each country present in the European Works Council, the representation of workers is organized, with also what are the methods that are used, what are the possibilities, what is the power that they have to do something, what's the level of information and consultation. So to explain really how it works, that makes it easier to understand each other when you are confronted with problems. So
I just breaking here. We are running a little late. Can you finish in 3 minutes?
Yeah,
Your presentation. Thank you.
Sorry. That's because I'm speaking English, then I'm speaking slower than in another language. So the other different is the level of the bargaining level. So in some countries it's on local level, in other countries on industrial level, and in some countries it's in national level. So again, the colors are explaining national level is the red colored, yellow level is industrial level, and blue is company level. Actually, there is a tendency to go to company level, and that it's very, very dangerous because it will make possible to install us more and more social dumping in the different countries. So you can see Central and East Europe, it's on company level and it's not neutral, I think. And the best is to have really collective agreements on industrial level and in a framework organized on national level. Then the organization level, so the collective bargaining coverage. So in the color red colored countries, it's 80% of the workers are covered by collective agreement. Then you have the yellow 40 to 80, and then you have the blue less than 40%. And I know in some countries it's even less than 20%. And I think it's very important to fight against, once again, social dumping, to have very good collective agreements, and that most of the workers are also covered by those collective agreements. Then committees health and safety. I think I will not go further in detail, but also you have different systems. You have the red countries. It's a kind of job stewards who are active on health and safety level. In other countries, you have the yellow. You have both job stewards and also health and safety committee. Then you have the green, that's a working group of the work councils who are active on health and safety, and the blue one, it's a mixed committee, health and safety, so worker representatives and employer representatives. Then how the people are elected or for the European Work Council to be a member of the European Work Council. So there you have also differences. Red colored countries, it's the trade union following the national legislation who will nominate to elect the representative in the European Work Council. In the green colored countries, it are the local work councils who will elect, who dedicate the member of the European Work Council or the special negotiation body. And in the yellow colored countries, it's by election about all the workers of the company who the representative will be elected. Then, and I think I will end with that, maybe other differences who are very important are cultural differences. And one of the differences who is very important, I think, to know is that the way of explaining and introducing something is different from North to South Europe. And in the north of Europe, people are saying what they want, and then they are argumenting why they want that. In south of Europe, most of the time, they are giving arguments pro, arguments again, and it is at the end of the introduction that they will say what they want. So if you are confronting both people, most of the time the Nordic are only listening in the beginning, and the one of the south are only listening at the end. So that means at the end, they didn't understand each other. So you have to take in account that there is a different way to do an introduction. Other thing that can bring problems is the concept of time. And the north of Europe is very strict. If you have a meeting from 8 to 5, everyone will be present at 8, but will go home at 5. if you are looking at the south, 8 means that maybe everyone will be there at 9, but they are also ready to stay till 6 to 7 if the meeting ticket necessary. Yeah, and last of all, another problem is the food. In north of Europe, they are most of the time taking dinner at 5, 6 in the evening. If you ask a Spanish colleague to take dinner at 5, 6 in the evening, he will say that you are crazy because they are eating at 9, 10 in the evening. So that are the big differences. Then you have differences between trade unions, but I think you have to take necessary time also to explain how in your country trade unions are organized. And because there's a big difference between the Latin model like France and the Nordic model. In Nordic model, you have only one trade union, but organized by statute. And in France, or most of the Latin countries, also in Belgium, you have different trade unions based on different politics, different philosophy. And sometimes the problems between those trade unions are bigger than the problems with management. So you have to try to understand. So I will end my introduction here. I think the best is, if you want to know more, we have a very good database, worker participation in Europe, where you can have more in detail the difference who exists from country to country. So thank you to listening to me. I hope that my English was not so bad and that everyone had the possibility to understand what I had the intention to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for showing us the differences that we are having in this part of the world, which is called Europe, and we can see that there are a lot of them in play. There was a call from Alva to include the Iceland into your presentation next time, because it's been wide for most of your Europe slides, so you might consider it for the future. And as well, we had some questions, but we'll move it to the next session because we run a bit late. We still have one speaker before the break, so without further ado, Romek, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Hello. I'll just quickly share my screen and we can start right away. So, of course, I am in the most difficult position because you've heard a lot of interesting information overkill, and I'm the only one, the last one standing between you and the break. That's always a very difficult position for a speaker, but I hope I'll manage to keep your attention focus for another couple of minutes and that it will be relevant and interesting. So without further ado, I was requested by the organizers to provide input on 2 points: confidentiality of information and the transnational character of information and consultation. And I will do so on both in a few slides that relate to the most recent research we have done on these topics. Just a sec, why isn't it working? I'm just gonna... Voila. So first of all, the several infographics that I'm going to show you on the next slides comes from a publication that the ETY is producing right now. It's forthcoming, hopefully still in 2020. It's a manual for European Works Councils on how to handle information, confidential information and consultation. It was written by CF Stopp from FNV Format, who is going to speak tomorrow, I believe, in this event, and myself. And it's the 4th manual in this series, hopefully shedding some light onto the question of confidentiality. Now, when we speak about confidentiality, there is more than that. There is more than just one notion. There is more than just one category of confidential information, as we've discovered. So first of all, I'd like to start by saying that actually confidentiality is something that is useful, that can be useful both for the company and for the EWC. And you know, starting from this point of view, that it can be useful, what I mean by that is that both the companies sometimes in a justified way do need to keep some information internal. I think this is not disputable, and no one reasonable would say that, you know, the companies shouldn't have any secrets. Of course they do. There are internal business to be discussed, production, technologies, and so on and so on. And not necessarily for EWCs or worker representatives, confidentiality has to be a limitation. Why I personally, why I believe confidentiality concept was introduced into the EWC directive was in order to create a safe space for discussion, for exchange of information. A safe space in which the employer will be able to share information within EWC and engage in an open dialogue about internal company matters, knowing that the EWC will not take it out, but outside of the company. But this wasn't meant as a filter, as a limitation, as an excuse not to communicate at all. And I think that this misconception, or this wasn't communicated, this isn't something that is coming out of the directive, and this understanding of this notion is not common, certainly not among the managers. Coming back to this slide, so without this, with this introduction, the company can either impose a duty of confidentiality on EWCs and say that they are not authorized to reveal any information which has expressly been provided to them as confidential. And there is another level of that confidentiality, if you will, to which we refer to as secrecy of information, is based on the provision that the management is not obliged to transmit information when its nature is such that, according to objective criteria, it would seriously harm the functioning of the undertaking. So as we can see, there are two levels of that. But as it seems, there is a third one too. There is what we refer to as extended confidentiality, because in some member states, for instance in Germany, the EWC can pass on information received from the management in confidentiality to local level, to national level employee representatives who are themselves bound by the obligation of confidentiality. So the information goes beyond the EWC but stays within the company, because people who have received the information are still under the duty to retain confidentiality. So that would be my first point. There is more than one level of confidentiality. Confidentiality can be graded. It can go from normal information that can be divulged to all employees. It can go through confidentiality to complete secrecy or withholding of information of consultation or consultation. Now, what we also work with in the manual and is part of the message is that not everyone receives the same information. Not all institutions or not all structures within a company, employee representation structures in a company, receive the same information. There is something like circles of confidentiality, as we called it. So first of all, there is the information that is retained only by the management. It's, you know, the most top secret, it's this information that never gets out beyond the management's boardroom. Then there is probably, or not probably, there is a circle of board level employee representatives. In some companies, I will not go into detail, but in some companies, employee representatives have the right to sit either on the managerial board or the supervisory board according to the national system. and they have access to the same information as other members of the supervisory board have, or as other executive directors on the managerial board have. So they have more information than an EWC would normally get. What we've also discovered is that in some EWCs, if we go further down the line of this concept of circles, that in some EWCs, it's not the entire EWC that receives the information, but it is the select committee that receives information from management in confidentiality or under confidentiality clause. And the management says, do not pass it on. It's only for your ears and for your eyes. And this is an extremely difficult position for a select committee because they are, they are a structure within an EWC to facilitate the operation and the working of the entire EWC, but by no means they are, the special ones, the more entitled ones. So whenever you are confronted with such an approach, with such a proposal by the management, you have to be very cautious and consider all the implications of that. And I think the implications are that long-term, this can really undermine the position of the select committee and the legitimacy of the select committee in the eyes of the entire EWC. And then when we go further down the line, when you have confidential information, you've got the European Works Council, obviously. Then we have the employee representatives. So here, be mindful of the extended confidentiality that I spoke about, that in some countries also employee representatives from beyond the EWC can have access to confidential information if they themselves declare and are bound to observe confidentiality. Then what we have is the last but one circle is information that can be divulged within the company, which would be considered internal company information. And then we have the information that is meant or accessible to the general public. So here again, this is a different perspective on the different aspects or levels of confidentiality. One other point that I would like to make is that when confidential information is considered, there are obviously, in this whole confidentiality concept, we shouldn't get convinced, or we shouldn't get into the rhetoric sometimes pushed by the management that an EWC is an outsider who is given access to confidential information or who is refused access to confidential information because they are outsiders. The main point here is that the central management, the EWC, the Works Council, the board level employee representatives, the employee representatives at undertaking, at factory level, at local level, they are not outsiders to company information, to company processes. They are the very insiders in a company. And confidential information is, or the concept of confidentiality is meant to protect internal information from getting out to the external world. And the external world would be the researchers, the trainers even, the stock market, the shareholders, the press and the media. These are outsiders, but not the worker representation structures and not the employees themselves. And of course, there is a little bit of a gray zone where the EWC coordinator, the expert, the translator, the trade unions who assist the EWCs come in. This has to be figured out, and we have to be mindful that they are somewhere in between. But the EWC is not an outsider. They shouldn't be treated like that, and we should not agree to that rhetoric sometimes pushed by the management when justifying the imposition of confidentiality. Now, one last aspect of confidentiality before I go into presenting you how that works in practice is the time aspect. Nothing is ever confidential forever. I mean, it's just as simple as that. And what we are trying to show here is that both as the circles to which information is divulged grow, so also expands the timeline on which the confidentiality is positioned. It has its due date. And sometimes the management holds or would like to hold an EWC bound to confidentiality when the information has been already released in a CSR report by the company, in a financial report, in an interview to the general press, and everybody knows it. It's findable on Google. It's in the press, but the EWC is still under the is supposedly still under the obligation to observe confidentiality. That is not true, and therefore it cannot be like that. And therefore, whenever confidentiality is imposed by the management, you should demand what specifically, what pieces of information are covered, not that the whole plenary meeting or a session within a plenary meeting is confidential, not that a whole presentation or documentation of 150 slides that is sometimes thrown at an EWC is confidential. You need to secondly ask for how long is it going to be confidential? When is the due date for confidentiality? And thirdly, what you should ask is always to whom it applies. What is the circle of confidentiality? Can I share it with the local level? Can I share it with the national level? Can I share it with the trade union? So be mindful of those. Now, this was just a sort of a conceptual framing of confidentiality, but how does it actually work in practice? And here, a little insight into the EWC survey that we did with Stan de Spiegelare and Jeremy Waddington 2018. Some of you have been addressed with this survey, so I'm sure that you will recognize some of your responses to it here. How often does it happen in the view of employee representatives, EWC members, that the management refuses to share information because of, on grounds of confidentiality? And almost 40% of the respondents replied that they think that management often refuses to share information by referring to the concept of confidentiality. In the interest of time and your mental sanity, I will not go further into detail on that, but I'll come back to this later on. Why is it important to have confidentiality figured out? Why is it such an important concept? It's not because it's just, you know, something that we are very militant about as trade unions and employee representatives, that we, for the principle of knowing it all, we want the management to share it, to share the entire information in a very transparent way. No, it's not this idealistic, it's not this principle understanding of confidentiality. It is a very much a pragmatic one. And this figure, this slide shows it very clearly. We ask the question, do you feel limited by confidentiality when talking about your EWC work to employees that you represent? And here I am just reminding of what I think was mentioned before, is that under the recast directive, employee representatives on EWC are actually obliged legally to report back to the national level, to the local level, to their constituents about the information consultation outcomes and what they do in an EWC. So the question here is, does confidentiality make you feel limited in observing this legal obligation in the very same directive? And actually, 34% of respondents said, yes, I feel limited because of confidentiality considerations. I feel either that I don't have enough information, I would rather not report about something when I'm in doubt, I will leave some information out because I don't know whether I could get in trouble or not, and so on and so forth. The last question we asked, so confronted with this confidentiality limitation, if you will, how often do you challenge management over what is confidential and not? And here, 46% of respondents, almost half of them, said that they often challenge management over what is confidential or not. Almost half of them do. Almost half of them feel so strongly about it, feel so strongly limited by the confidentiality, that they actually raise it to the management and say, we do not agree. Is the glass half empty or half full? I leave it for consideration and for the following sessions to consider. One last piece of information from this EWC survey. So we've got this complicated issue of confidentiality. It is admittedly complex and difficult. It is a legal matter. People are very often confronted with it in their work and they feel limited. So do they need actually training on it? Well, this is the surprising part, because 41% of EWC members who are surveyed by us replied that they did receive a training on how to deal with confidential information. Well, again, half empty, half full, 4 in 10 received it. But among those who received the training, we asked the question, do you need more? And here, only 6.8% said, yes, I need more training on that, which surprised us because it is the lowest result, you know, from all the other items about which we asked whether you need further training. And equally, among those who have not received the training on confidentiality, we asked, do you need it? And only 54% almost said, yes, I need it. Only 54. And again, the lowest reply rate from all the other items that we asked about training. So to conclude the part on the training and quickly go into transnationality, making a few points about transnationality. Confidentiality clauses are supposed to create a safe space. They should be for exchange of information and consultation, not a break, not a limitation, not an excuse not to share information at all. And they are an exception to normal information rights. They should not be the principle. Withholding information by management must be strictly limited and applied only based on objective criteria. EWCs are the insiders to the processes in the company. They are not third parties. And therefore, for instance, the mentioning by management of the stock market regulation is just an abuse, because stock market regulation is supposed to protect information from getting to third parties rather than to EWCs. So here the hierarchy, there is no hierarchy because between stock market regulation and confidentiality, because these operate and they are meant for totally different purposes. And you have, as a last point that I didn't cover, but I want to mention it, you have the right to challenge management in courts about confidentiality. Now, I do feel the intense sight of Cyprian on me, who is looking at the watch with one eye and with the other on me, and I do feel the pressure. So I'm going just to quickly rush through.
You're okay to go. I have negotiated with the audience 10 more minutes, so you're free to go.
Thank you. You are too generous. It's always dangerous to mention to a speaker that he has extra time because he's going to abuse it. But I will try to not to do it. Okay, so the second part now, the transnationality of information. The legal framework is ambiguous. I'll put it this way. We have in the recast directive, we have Article 1.4, which is the binding provision in the EWC recast directive that deals with transnational character of a matter. I'm going to quickly quote it. These are matters essentially that concern the company as a whole, or at least two undertakings in two different member states. Now, pretty simple, it would seem, but of course nothing is simple when it comes to application in practice. So this is what I refer to, this Article 1.4 is what I refer to as the quantitative definition of transnationality. Quantitative because it mentions the two member states as the decisive factor, as the decisive criterion to qualify something as transnational or not. So it's according to this, it's simple. Two member states are, a decision, a matter that concerns two undertakings in two different member states, transnational, affecting one undertaking in one member state, not transnational, local, not for EWC. Well, Yes and no, because when you look into the preamble of the directive for further enlightenment about this ambiguous provision, you find two relevant recitals. One of them is recital 12 that was already in the old directive, specifying generally that an EWC must be properly informed and consulted about decisions that are taken in another member state, in a member state other than this where they are employed, where the employer representatives are employed. So that's a general provision. Presumption here is that every decision taken in another member state where it will be implemented is part of a transnational strategy of a company. So, for instance, a decision to close a plant in country A implies certain activities, sends ripples, has impact on the operation of undertakings in other countries. We also have a new recital 16 that is the powerful addition to the provision in Article 1.4, which mentions that a transnational matter has to take account, or the qualification of a matter as transnational has to take into account the potential effects, not even the real one, potential, hypothetical, the ones that may occur in future. Secondly, it should also take into account the level of management and representation that it involves. And it should be, these matters should be classified as such, regardless of the number of the member states that are involved, but matters that are of importance for the European workforce in terms of the scope of their potential effects. So again, you know, there is a lot of potentiality here, and employee interests are mentioned. And if you think who is to determine what are employees' interests, well, it clearly is the EWC, because based on Article 10 of this directive, excuse me, the EWC collectively represents the interests of employees. So who decides about about transnationality? Well, according to recital 16, it should be the EWC. And one last point maybe about here, it is not necessarily that these decisions need to negatively affect the EWC, but affect generally, also in a positive sense, possibly. This vagueness of the directive, combined with a minimum transposition in the member states, minimum transposition meaning that limited only to Article 1.4, to transposing only the quantitative definition, has led to a lot of ambiguity and problems. Only, I believe, Austria and some other country, when transposing the directive, made reference to the potential effects of a decision when considering its transnational character. This is why the ETUC in 2017 adopted a position paper for a modern EWC directive, commenting upon the recast directive, where it says that the concept of transnational character of a matter should be consolidated and incorporated into the main body of the directive. In other words, all the good stuff from the recitals that we just said about the potential effect and the transnational character, regardless of the number of member states involved, it should be moved into the body of the directive. It should become the binding part of the core of the directive. Now, knowing that there is so much confusion and vagueness in terms of those rules, does it translate into practice? Well, of course it does, because we asked the question in the EWC survey about whether you've been involved in frequent discussions about what is transnational and what is not. And we found 37%, more than 37% of respondents saying, yes, we engage frequently in discussions about what is transnational. So in other words, 37% of respondents said we are discussing the very basic thing that makes our EWC competent or not competent to deal with certain information. I will not go into the studies, but the studies confirm that there is a problem. There have been at least 3 recent studies about the transnational character. One important point is that, of course, the views between the employees and employers differ. The employers said that keeping EWCs as a transnational forum can be quite challenging, since employee representatives tend to bring up local issues to the EWC meetings. In other studies, of course, the ambiguous character of the legislation was mentioned, and the Commission took notice of that when preparing the evaluation of the implementation of the directive in 2018. And last point that I want to make with this is that this vagueness and the problems with transnationality are one of the most frequent and most pivotal ones when it comes to litigation. So we have 10 court cases in our EWC litigation database that record cases brought to court by EWCs that were exactly about transnationality. Stan mentioned the British Airways case, which was one of the landmark cases. I would only like to add here is that in the British Airways case, the company not only tried to say that something wasn't transnational, but they also used the so-called salami tactic. So they had the restructuring took place in several member states at different moments in time. But the EWC was able to convince the court that actually, you know, these were slices of the same sausage, if you will, and they should be considered as one big strategy to restructure. And therefore, even though that there were shifts in time between those measures and decisions, they should be considered one transnational measure. So for more details, please go to the court cases database and read more about it. And one last point for practice is that I would say that all items that are brought to EWC because of the level at which they are discussed, the central management and the transnational employees representation, they are by nature informations of transnational character. And second of all, it is not up to the EWC, or it should not be up to the EWC to argue that something is transnational. It should be the other way around. It should be the management convincing, if they have arguments, that something is not transnational, because a transnational company and decisions by transnational by central management and a transnational company are again by nature transnational, unless proven otherwise. But that's the job of the management. Thank you for your attention.